Hey, peace and love, family. I'm gonna go in today on the topic of jurisdiction. Now, this one here, it's a very very broad subject, so I'm not gonna be able to go on everything. When it comes to jurisdiction, it's just too many facets, and it would take a couple hours long video to really go in on everything possible. But what I'm gonna do is try and go specifically in on um, a few types of jurisdiction that are most relevant to people in the movement. Um, and it's really going to be more of territorial and personam jurisdiction, um, along with national imperial jurisdiction. Um, and I'm going to break down, you know, a few of the differences when it comes to these things. Um, so, start off. I'm gonna come in a little bit. On the far left, we have the public, semi-public, and private jurisdictions. And well, these are not necessarily jurisdictions, but different aspects of things can be in these jurisdictions. And defining what I mean. Um, when I say public, this is pertaining to the corporation, and private is outside of the corporation. More in particular, the semi-public. Um, I didn't particularly write it, but it could be things more in relation to the corporation, or um, things in jurisdiction that could be said to be outside the corporation, but still kind of floating around. And I'm gonna go further in on what I mean on that later. But you know, I did want to make a distinction. So um, first off, when it comes to jurisdiction, um, or for what we're gonna be discussing today, um, territorial jurisdiction, which is land, and personam jurisdiction, um, which is the chattel paper or the birth certificate. Um, and this is because this is in the public realm, so anything in the public realm is going to be a fiction, or anything dealing with the corporation in particular is going to be a fiction. So when police, courts, and different entities are trying to, excuse me, when they're trying to presume and assert jurisdiction, um, is definitely dealing with the chattel paper. Um, Even though they may put some bodily attachment to it, it's only for the most part either because it's voluntary, because you agree to it, or they do it out of presumption and you have to rebut what's going on in the situation. So let's break it down on that side first, um, before we get more into the territory side. Um, as you can see, I have a few different things up here, and these are public jurisdictions, all dealing with corporations. These are separate corporations, to be specific. So, municipal, which would be the city. Um, County, which is a separate jurisdiction. These are both local jurisdictions. Um, the county records are said to be in most places, and depending on where you're at, I would say older than the state for the most part, and um, that's where a lot of morgues in particular file paperwork um, in the public. If you're going to put anything into the public, like name correction proclamations and things of that sort, um, liens, property records, stuff like that. Those generally go into the county, and when you're dealing with the county jurisdiction, um, the head of the county is usually, or is always, it's an elected judge. Um, so when it comes to, dealing with somebody on that level and put them on notice, that's definitely, who you would want to know. You want to know who that is in your area, the local county, elected county judge. Because they're the ones that will put everyone else on notice. Let's say if you had something like a private order of injunction on them to not prosecute, um, unless it was something for extreme public safety hazard or, other common law crimes like damage to property or persons, which or things that you just can't get around, and you have to take responsibility for. The only things that are actually crimes, besides a lot of these commercial crimes. On the municipal level, that would be the mayor. Now, the mayor is over the chief of police, but also they're in cahoots with the sheriff, and the county sheriff also, besides the judge, is someone you would want to put on notice when it comes to your paperwork and things of that sort, especially when it comes to your right to travel. The elected sheriff is the one who holds the most jurisdiction, basically on that level, and deputizes all of the other policy enforcers. So you could say, that is the only person that holds jurisdiction, and if it would come down to anything, that's the person you would hold accountable. Now, on these two lower level jurisdictions, also, this is where 90% of the time the birth certificate is first issued. It would be either on a city level, county level, depending on the jurisdiction. It could be parish, if it's Louisiana, or I'm not sure if there are any other states that operate under that type of French jurisdiction. But that is always where the original bond comes from, and that bond is the first document always that first misclassifies us as Negro, Black, Colored, or any of these other colorable terms. It's the first document to have the name in all caps, the straw man, and is missing nationality, in general. Now, there are some that teach, and I do to a certain extent agree, that the birth certificate itself is the first document that makes you a citizen. I wouldn't say it necessarily makes you a citizen itself. I would say the birth certificate itself is the citizen. Because that chattel paper is the personam, or the legal person. And if you never checked out the definition of person in Black's Law Dictionary or in any legal dictionary before checking this video, I definitely go check that out and understand the difference between a person and a person. But I figure most people already have that down, but you never know. But when it comes down to it, that first initial birth certificate issued um, is the person, and that is the citizen. So um, on that level, um, when it comes to most things, it's mostly like traffic things and that sort that you would get on a county or a city level, like a city parking ticket or things of that sort. They, for the most part, besides the issuance of the bond, they don't try and assert further jurisdiction, uh, except for every once in a while trying to draw commerce from the bonds. Due to commercial crimes and things of that sort. But for the most part, that's where it's at. Now, let's jump up to the next level, the state. Um, on the state level, there is the governor. Um, you can put on notice the comptroller, um, comptroller of currency. That's the state's banker. Definitely want to get them on notice if you're doing something that may involve them, letting them know who you are, what you got going on. Um, the comptroller is the one that handles the discharge when it comes to things on a state level. Now, one thing, if you've really watched my videos, most people that are really with me have got the status correction package and things of that sort, um, and really gone through the process of counterdeeding the birth certificate. They know that there's one issued on the state level as well, and a lot of times you can get that one online. Um, so, in a more technical sense, you could say that birth certificate, the state birth certificate, um, and the difference between these two birth certificates, the one issued on the city or the county level and the one issued on the state level, is the seals at the bottom. And that makes it a big difference if you got a county deed. The definitions are in there, but the types of bond that they are, um, one being issued at the state is defined a little bit different than the one issued on the municipal level, but that would be the state citizen, technically, the state birth certificate. So there are two long form birth certificates, and the difference in the seals on the bottom, if you go back and check my other videos on it, will let you know which one you have. And you know when you go into state level cases, these are higher level, what they would call criminal charges for the most part. Um, I'm not going to go real deep, or I'm not really going to go into, at all criminal jurisdiction in this video, which is what a lot of people really, really trying to fight and, figure out how to work. And I'm going to have to do a whole nother video on challenging jurisdiction and things of that sort. But when it comes to state level jurisdiction, it's similar to what the county and the city are trying to do when they're trying to make presumptions and assumptions on the birth certificate or on that bond, and then they try and attach the bodily attachments to that. So, you definitely want to understand about the separation between these, and that goes a little bit deeper into status correction and the things that we do. But these public jurisdictions all separate. Technically, it would be two citizens, at that point. The thing is, the way they try and classify it is that as if they're one and the same. And I can see why, because with the city jurisdiction um, being subordinate to the state, um, basically it's the authentication process. They have to go up the level, um, and one is backing the other, giving the other full faith and credit. So um, anything that happens on the city level is considered an act of state in a certain sense, and um, that's really why the local government or the local jurisdiction is the most powerful. Um, for an everyday sense, dealing with people, that would be the most important jurisdiction. Um, Now, bumping it up to federal jurisdiction, and the United States citizen or a federal citizen. Um, there's several people on the federal level that you can put on notice as far as your nationality, things of that sort. The Secretary of Treasury is one of the most important, I think, when it comes to discharge and, things of that sort that's going to deal with what people deal with on the everyday level. But when it comes to federal citizenship and how it's defined, technically, you would have to be born on federal land to be a citizen, meaning D.C. or one of the territories and or army bases, and they try and extend that out um, even further to include everyone. But you know, um, if you're just strictly going by, you know, the constitutional sense, and then what was properly ratified in the Constitution as opposed to what was not, and I'm not going to go into all of that there, you know, then, there's only very few actual federal citizens and people that are actual U.S. citizens and that fall into that realm. Um, one thing I did skip on state level is once you start getting into state level, they issue ID. So going along with the birth certificate, the Social Security card, which technically is a federal level document. Um, but um, the Social Security Administration is a private corporation, so with them falling into the public, um, they use it in a sense as federal jurisdiction, but it's not. So you have to volunteer to really even be a part of that contract. But along with that, you know, I was talking about ID on a federal level. Um, the ID to identify you as a federal citizen or a United States citizen, the only identification they have for that is a passport. Um, and studying into the passport, there is, um, you know, there's various methods that people are teaching out here to become a non-citizen national, or to get a passport in that status. Now, from what I've seen, for the most part, they haven't really issued those out to Moors properly. There are Moors that are getting their national appellation onto the passport, which is a federal ID, uh, under that federal jurisdiction. Um, but if it doesn't necessarily state that you're a national and not a citizen, technically it made you a citizen. So we definitely need to go into that further. I'm gonna have to do a whole nother video, dealing with remedy when it comes to that. Um, because there's a lot of things that people teaching out here, and I'm not gonna necessarily say that what everyone is teaching is wrong, but the thing is, I believe that just that process in general needs to be updated. Um, so um, let's get into the redemption movement. In general, since favorite uh, jurisdiction, we could say, and that's the UCC jurisdiction, or it's an international jurisdiction. There could be several international jurisdictions, and I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into that in a second. But um, dealing with the UCCs, you could say that's still in the public um, or in the corporation's jurisdiction to a certain extent, because um, in a treaty style fashion, or you could even say in government style fashion, if you want to consider them government more than corporation, either way. But they've signed off or ratified pretty much the UCC in the jurisdictions under what you could call the United States. So all the 50 states, to my knowledge, except for maybe Louisiana, um, and um, not just that, but actually states, or yes, you could say states or countries outside of the United States. A lot of them which fall under, to the best of my knowledge, but and it could be more than just that, but ones that are under the UN jurisdiction, um, and even ones that are outside of the United Nations jurisdiction. Um, there are, I can't say how many, but it'd be easier to say that there are very few countries that don't deal with the UCC. As far as that commercial jurisdiction, which kind of brings us to the middle, the semi-public, um, which is, I'm gonna define it as outside of the U.S. corporation, but like I say, it could be dealing with the U.S. corporation, or maybe even within the U.S. corporation in certain senses. You know, it's a degree of separation, but at the same time, it doesn't totally get you out of a place where you could be encumbered. You know, and for that reason, in general, is why there are more, a lot of them older, that teach specifically against doing UCCs. Um, I'm not necessarily against doing a UCC, but I would say understand what you're doing before you're doing it. If you're gonna do it right. When it comes to anything, skipping steps is the worst thing that you could do in any process, and not overstanding the process before you fully get into it. Those are the two worst things that you could do. When it comes to doing any process. So, um, with the UCCs in general, what's going on is people are trying to put a lien um, onto the birth certificate. And, well, what they're doing, they are, in a sense, putting a lien on the birth certificate, or onto the chattel person. And the thing is, when it comes to the UCC, it works with different countries because it is subordinate to treaties. So, how I have it here in green in the middle. Um, Different treaties regulate the UCC, and the country's law reigns supreme, you could say, in a sense, over the UCC. And I'd have to do some videos actually going into the UCC, showing and proving all of this here, because that's a in-depth topic of itself. But what Moors must remember, um, even though there are, or we have the right to operate totally organic without all of that, that the original Barbary treaties were treaties of peace and friendship and amity and commerce. So the jurisdiction that we used to hold power over the Europeans was a commercial jurisdiction. So in this same sense, Europeans now are trying to flee from what was the United States republic, you could say. They're trying to flee to that from the corporate jurisdiction. The problem is, and I'm gonna get into that later, you have to have a nationality to be in the republic's jurisdiction. So what's going on is, when they authenticate their birth certificate, they put it into a foreign trust, when they lean it and all of those things. But what's happening is that they operate in that international waters, basically. If they don't have a nationality along with what they're doing, if you're not claiming a separate nationality from being a United States citizen, now what people are trying to do, and I understand what's going on, in looking for redemption, there are two different, you could say, schools of thought when it comes to what people are doing. Some are claiming the state citizenship, which we went over, state citizenship, and that level of jurisdiction, which is a public jurisdiction. Yes, technically it is still outside of the jurisdiction of the federal United States. It's a separate jurisdiction. Depending on what state and the state's constitution, and land records in particularly, it could be a benefit to be a state citizen for Europeans. For Moors, not as much. Okay, the thing is, when you talk about being in the state citizen jurisdiction, as opposed to American national, is the other one that they're trying to run to not be a U.S. citizen, and I'm going to get into that in just a second. With the state citizen jurisdiction, Moors, or you could even say unproclaimed Moors, the problem that they're running into is, they may not even be aware of this issue, but the issue with that is you're falling into a jurisdiction that's still run by Europeans for the most part. Any state citizens, the sovereign citizen movement, they're claiming to be state citizens. So, let's say you're claiming to be part of the state government republic. You know, there's nothing wrong with that and operating in that capacity outside of the corporate state capacity. But when you scale that up is where it will become an issue. And what I mean by that is when it comes to, um, let's say, if you were going to operate out of a state republic government, um, either simultaneously with or even with attempts to take over the de facto, what you would run into is who's trying to be the leader of this jurisdiction and the people claiming this. So it always goes back to the people. So um, you know, there are a group of Europeans out here um, in our territory that operate under the name the Texas Republic. You know, that is separate. You know, and they have an office separate from the Texas state so-called government in Austin. You know, so um, it wouldn't necessarily be beneficial for Moors to operate necessarily under that republic. You know, it would be best for us to have our own, which we do have our own, that we can use, or we could even have our own. We could create our own local governments as well. Um, you know, this was the what the prophet was doing with set up the Moorish Science Temple in the way he did under the Herd's Revised Statutes or Home Rule. You know, as they call it out here in Texas, but it's essentially having our own local government or city government. You know, so that goes back to land, which is the other side of this, and I'm gonna get into that in just a second, and that's very necessary. Um, but I also wanted to get into the other side of this coin when it comes to American nationals. You know, it would be the exact same thing when it comes to that. Um, you know, we have so many Europeans in this movement, you know, that want to claim that they're American nationals. Um, you know, when it comes down to leadership, we would bump right back into the same problem that, you know, is not necessarily our Moorish government, even though the Moors are the true Americans. Um, so from there, I am gonna go into land, but I'm gonna jump down to the private side, and let's go into the Republic, and I want to break that down, um, give people an understanding because that really goes into um, when you say American national, who really qualifies or what is an American national? Um, so, in the Republic, we're going to define that as pre-Unitas.A or before the corporation. Now, any, I'm not going to say every single government that was here, but the ones that I have listed in particular, it's because they actually held significant land title. So that's really what qualifies the most when it comes to jurisdiction on the land is having your full ownership of the land, and I'm gonna get into what all that is pretty soon. But in the Republic pre-corporation, and let's qualify that as well, because the treaty that was signed, peace and friendship, amity and commerce, you know, it was a commercial treaty giving the Europeans um, access to the 13 colonies for commercial purposes, basically, to live and set up. And that treaty, in a sense, gave them, you could say, the mandate to the land, up until the Appalachians over here. But that was only England. So in the pre-republic at that time, England, was one of the last ones to get over here. So before then, there was the indigenous, or the Moors over here. So the indigenous people, the Aboriginals, the Autochthonous ones. We have a allodial title over here, but also Aboriginal title. One being a component of the other. And the indigenous, being any Americans that are pre-Europeans, depending on how far we go back more into the history, we have title from Hanno Bay coming over, inscribing on the Born Stone, in BC times, annexing this land to the Moorish Empire, and then many on after that. So, when it comes to allodial and Aboriginal title, the Moors definitely have entitlement to that, and we're here. And even as late as the 11 or 1200s, I want to say it was the 1200s, when Mansa Musa's brother and uncle, I want to say, both came over here in big legions of ships. So there have been more settled on this land, far before, and with those having significant land title, even after them, with the Europeans coming over here before England, Spain, had land grants. And you could also say, the French, Dutch, and even Texas, coming up out of Mexico, which was part of the Spanish Empire, the new viceroy of Spain. But they all had land grants that predate the United States. Even Texas itself, still having its land patent, or the land grant intact, that was never issued over or transferred over to the United States, which is how you can prove Texas is still a sovereign country, because it still has that land dealing with the patents, and I'm going to get into what that means in just a second. But, if you're not holding one of those flags, then you're still in international waters when you're trying to claim that you're an American national. So, an American national with only the United States banner would really be incorrect, which is why we have our red flag with the green star that the prophet brought up. He retrieved for us, on this land, before it was even put into use in the country of Morocco in 1956, when they became a sovereign country over there. The prophet had it in use, over here in the early 1900s. So, that republic jurisdiction would be the jurisdiction, you could say, of the American nationals. The only problem is, if you don't have, or not proclaiming your nationality separate from the United States nationality, with an actual flag, you're in international waters. But when you proclaim your nationality as a Moor, or even technically a European, could claim French American or, something of that sort. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of what they need to do because, frankly, I haven't studied exactly, the remedy for Europeans, but I can tell you that in general, the remedy for everyone getting out of this United States corporation is to proclaim your nationality. So that way, when you authenticate your birth certificate, what we do as Moors, we're counter deeding it, which is similar to the lien that they're doing with the UCC, but we're attaching it to our foreign trust on land. You know, um, Now let's get into land. When it comes to the public and private, when it comes to land, because that's a territorial jurisdiction, and there are ways to operate within and without these jurisdictions, but it comes into ownership, and doing all the paperwork properly. So, in the public, when it comes to land, public lands owned by the corporation, that's government land. Your courthouses, buildings, maybe government parks and things of that sort, but that's it. Um, Technically, anything that's not privately held, um, which even when they talk about privately held, it's still semi-public. Until you get into the allodial realm of things, and this comes with having your different titles or deeds to the land and understanding what that is. So on the lower end, you have the way that they technically steal land or where they're colonizing is with the special warranty deeds. This is like the lowest form of land ownership from my research into real estate, which on the higher end would be fee simple ownership. And they call it different things depending on what jurisdiction you're in. Um, they differ from county to county, within states. So it'll be different from state to state, depending on where you're at. But, it'll be a deed of trust or a general deed. That's basically equivalent to fee simple. Being what they consider the highest form of ownership. And it is in that semi-public commercial realm. The thing is, in that realm, the UCCs and liens and things of that sort apply when it comes to property, and people can put liens on your property. Another thing that falls within that realm, which is also in the public realm, and I didn't mention it, but I want to bring it up in this particular one, is tax, because when you're operating in these realms, which a lot of people like to do, you still have to deal with taxing when it comes to the money. And I'm gonna get into that next after I'm done with land. Um, but yeah, back to the land. Special warranty deed. When they do foreclosure sales and government takes land and things of that sort, a lot of times what they're doing is issuing special warranty deeds, basically saying, um, it's not a high form of deed because they're warranting against, basically, if the true owner comes back and knows how to make their claim against, any of the bullshit they did. Because um, generally in foreclosures, if it's a foreclosure that's in your name, not, you trying to take over someone else's foreclosure, there are things that wouldn't disclose, and there's still remedy for you getting your property, because in a foreclosure, that what happens is, for the most part, they're saying that you're abandoning the property, and they're making presumptions and telling you lies to get you to abandon the property. So then they can do their administrative process is what they're doing just in general. They're doing an administrative process to default you out of that property. So you there's options, and it really comes into understanding who you are and what to do with that birth certificate bond. You can definitely discharge them kind of situations to get up out of the water. So that wouldn't even be an issue. But the thing is, when it comes to getting your land together, and I talked about this in the last video dealing with the land mandate, and true land ownership, you have to get your land patent together. And claim that, which the land patent or the land grant is the original issuing of the land, and claiming that is how you truly get your ownership to the property. That is a component, of the allodial title, and once you get that and restructure your title into an allodial title, and even take the next steps and file all the paperwork properly, is how you get into allodial status when it comes to land. And if you don't know what allodial land is, definitely look that up. Look up the word allodial, free from feudal lord, basically. But in essence, allodial land is land that's outside of any other jurisdiction, which is what we should all be striving for, and how you truly have your own country or cities, local jurisdictions that Europeans can't even come onto. They can't tax and things of that sort, which gets you back into the republic. Having this allodial land. Now, I do want to go back, like I said, into money, because that's another way that they issue assumptions. Because the money, or the Federal Reserve notes in particular, are issued out by public corporations. So it's public commercial paper, or you could call it private commercial paper, because it's owned by that private corporation, even though they call it the public. It's the flip between the public and the private. But in essence, what's going on is, if you're claiming to be outside of a particular jurisdiction, having their currency can be a minimum contact, which allows them to do what they call a long arm statute, something that'll allow them to pull you into their jurisdiction. This is why a lot of people in the Security Party movement, redemption movement thing, they learn to deal outside of the Federal Reserve notes and deal with bonds, bill of exchanges, just different types of commercial instruments, or negotiable instruments. And these things all fall within that international water, or UCC jurisdiction, international jurisdiction. I also didn't mention the UPU is being in the international jurisdiction. That's the postal jurisdiction. And I'm going to have to do a whole video just on that. That might even go on the Patreon. I'm not sure. Also dealing in this this international water, when it comes to money, I would say is where crypto falls as well, because at the current situation of where we're at, there's no official um, government cryptos except for maybe the Nigerian one that I heard something about, and um, there's like one or two others, and I don't want to mention in particular one that I'm dealing with, but the thing is, for the most part though, cryptocurrencies are, you know, they're being treated as securities, and that even more happened recently with Bitcoin. Um, and at this point, since that Bitcoin blow, you have to register, if you're in the United States or one of these type of territories, under that jurisdiction. Um, you have to register with the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, to even create a digital currency now, because they're considered so valuable. Because the fact of, even though technically um, it's in that fiat realm, or de facto realm, is not a de jure currency. It still holds value. And when it jumped to 20,000 to $1, even now, with it being, over 7,000, for today, from what I saw earlier today, it's still, it's in the over 7,000 range. Um, Bitcoin is much more valuable than the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is falling. So, you know, so once you understand, and learn to operate in these realms, that this is how people learn to use, if you see my video, the financial full faith and credit. If you don't understand that term, financial full faith and credit, you definitely need to go back and check out the 2 videos I did on authentication of the birth certificate, where I break that down, and even show on Investopedia, where they give the financial definition, and then the part 2 video that I did afterward, where after my video they removed the definition because of my video. That it was no official notice, but it's clear that's what went on. They removed that definition when I really broke down what was going on when it comes to that financial full faith and credit, and that's what people are using to back their bonds, bill of exchanges, money orders, things of that sort. To get out of using that fiat. Um, and that is a good thing to do, to be out of that jurisdiction, but to be totally private, to be outside of that the corporation, um, you really need to be using silver and gold, which is funny, um, because it's written into the Constitution. So in the Republic, the only currency is gold and silver, or dealing with coins. Um, you know, People would say that the Treasury issues out de jure money, even though that technically they're still part of the corporation. They predate it and the bankruptcy in 33 and all of this here, where they restructured everything. So they issue out, you could say, lawful money from the Treasury, but I still wouldn't say it's necessarily money of the Republic, um, unless it specifically would say it on there. Uh, and that's a little bit of my conjecture when it comes to that, because anyone or any country, can mine their own silver or gold, and that is de jure currency. Uh, that is definitely outside of any other jurisdiction. And it's something we can do as Moors and need to do um, if you're really, really serious about setting up jurisdiction and things of that sort, is having a currency. But the thing is, it's so much that goes in the backgrounds and in the makings of having a currency and having a government structure set up properly to operate and to have a currency that is valuable and that can be traded amongst others. That is something you really want to do in quiet until it's fully operational. Just to be honest, because of the dynamics that are going on out here. But money definitely is something that can be used to pull you into jurisdiction. So I'm almost done here, but I want to wrap it up um, down here in green with religious jurisdiction. Um, that is a big thing, and it's weird because okay, religious jurisdiction is the, you could say, civil jurisdiction that people fall under, as opposed to criminal jurisdiction. Now, um, with Moors in particular, there's no separation of church and state, as opposed to it supposedly is with Christians. They make the distinction, supposedly, allegedly, between church and state. Um, so you could say church and state, um, both in a sense would have civil jurisdiction, but also they both operate in dual jurisdictions when it comes to personam jurisdiction, even though they don't necessarily have jurisdiction over your chattel property unless that's something you grant, but you voluntarily submit to that jurisdiction. Um, so okay, we have to break it down. Because they also have territorial or land jurisdiction when they own land. There's a religion, the church, the Vatican, whatever. But and when I say the religion of Moors, I'm including the Islam, Hebrew, the MSTA, even traditional religions that could or even don't fall necessarily under Islam, but don't fall under Christian or Catholicism, which the both of these, you could say, Islam and Christianity, are imperial jurisdictions. Because to say you are Moor, or under Islam, at the time when the treaties were signed during the war and things of that sort, Moors were not only from Morocco, though Morocco was the seat of the empire. You could have been from Tunis, Tripoli, Algiers, Egypt, or any other Moorish country that was recognized that we held dominion over. In the same sense, when it came to Christianity, Catholicism, there's somewhat of a split, but at the same time, they still all fall under that Christian jurisdiction. So, when it came to the papal bull, issued by the popes and things of that sort. Spain, France, England, the Danish, Dutch, who all held land over here, they all fell under that same Christian imperial jurisdiction. And, their mandate was that they could steal Moorish lands, if we were non-Christians or infidels or, devil worshippers. And they were, very successful at conquering anyone that they were saying wasn't them, regardless of what your faith necessarily would have been. But when it comes down to it, and I'm close to my last point. I don't want to leave people on here too long, getting bored, but it's definitely gonna wrap up with a bang, so stick around to the end. But as more so-called black people in America, and when it comes into jurisdiction, especially personam jurisdiction, when you call yourself black, it brings you under the Christian black codes, makes you a subject to their civil jurisdiction. So that comes into bringing up what we call subject matter jurisdiction. Now, subject matter jurisdiction, is one of the ones in court, that they talk about personam and subject matter. Do they have jurisdiction over the subject and over the person to be able to continue? Thing is, and I've done videos, but I'm gonna have to do another one. In particular, I am on these two cases, Dred Scott versus William Dungy. The difference between the two and what happened was the way they classified themselves. Dred Scott sued as a black man under the name Scott. And, he initially won, but the case eventually was overturned in federal court, because they're said that because he was black, he had no rights that they were bound to respect as white men, basically. And what that meant was that by him saying that he was black, he fell under the Christian black codes. He was one of their subjects, and that he was in error in general. That the case was in error. Versus the William Dungy case, which the William Dungy case was a Moor. And Abraham Lincoln fought this case, and these cases were only about 10 years apart. I went over it in one of my videos, but I'm gonna do one particularly going in on just these two. But William Dungy, it was a slander case, and he was saying that he wasn't black, that he was a Moor, and that was what Lincoln argued, and he won the case. Saying, to the judge that he was M-O-O-R, not, Moor as being just the last name when they add the E onto it in particular, and saying that, though my client has black skin, he's not black. And they even went into the particulars of saying that he had a nationality in that case. He was Portuguese, that he wasn't of this obscure background that they try to make black people from, which is why black people keep falling into the Christian black codes and being under their jurisdiction. So the remedy, to all of this, I have to keep coming back to it, is you have to proclaim your nationality. And, nationality and your land and everything that ties into that brings you out of their jurisdiction. And that's the best I can put it, fam. Peace and love.